Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen who have joined us on this Dr. Fundi channel. My name is Dr. Fundi Nyati. I'm the host on this digital channel. I want to welcome all of you who have joined us via the multiple social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and also via the Dr. Fundi website. Since yesterday, I've been advertising that today we are going to be discussing the alleged association between COVID-19, the disease, and also 5G telecoms, technologies. We are all aware, all of us who are in social media, we are all aware that there has been a number of, videos that have been circulating, via Facebook, via, all other platforms, via WhatsApp, and some of the information that is shared within these videos, to an untrained eye, some of the things may actually appear to be credible information, up until you drill down and actually see that some of the things do not actually make any scientific sense. So I'm one of those people who always wants to get into arguments, but focus on facts, proven facts, scientific facts, rather than just a hearsay. So we decided that this is one area that we need to address, as the Dr. Fundi channel. About 2-3 days ago, I attended, a webinar of the ANC. It was about the rollout of the vaccine and other matters of the COVID-19 response. As a participant that was actually quite quiet in that platform, one of the things that became clear from most of the participants was that the issue of dissemination of information, especially around 5G, is becoming a big challenge, to an extent that it's creating anxieties amongst those who are planning to roll out the vaccination program. Because there's a lot that is being said about COVID-19, the disease, the vaccine, and this COVID-19, and this 5G technology. So I decided then that I needed to invite somebody who is appropriately qualified to help us to understand, the maze of information around 5G. So this is going to be a 90-minute session. The first 30 minutes, I'm just going to ask questions, basic questions that create a foundation of understanding about, the evolution of the electromagnetic, radiation, so that we can have that foundation. I will ask questions in the first 30 minutes, and then the last 60 minutes, anybody, can send a question. Some have already sent questions. So my colleague Nwabisa is going to then, ask those questions to Mr. Nyati. So, Mr. Langa Nyati, welcome to the Dr. Fundi channel.
Thank you, Dr. Fundi, and thank you so much for inviting me into this channel. And I also would like to say hi to your audience.
Thank you very much. Just a little bit about why did I invite, Mr. Nyati. It's not because we have got a blood relation. No, he is here because he sat behind the desk and studied very hard, bent the midnight all over many, many years, and qualified as an electronics engineer at the University of Natal, now called UKZN. That was in 1994. After that, he then had a brief stint in the Eastern Cape, but he didn't really get a job that gave him a challenge there. And so he moved to Johannesburg, worked for Centec for a few years, I think 3 to 4 years at Centec, dealing with some of the issues that we are talking about here in the broad radio engineering space. And then he moved from there and joined Vodacom as a junior engineer and worked up to, the high levels within Vodacom South Africa. And then he was deployed to go and implement or roll out network for the mobile technologies in Lesotho. So he spent a number of years in Lesotho, basically, at the coalface of some of the issues that we're going to be dealing with today. So he basically has about 26 years of practical experience on matters of radio technology, radio engineering, and the evolution of the technologies. So that's the reason why I invited him. The fact that there is a blood relation is a secondary matter. So thank you very much, Mr. Nyati. I will call you Zoreyo for agreeing to be with us this afternoon. So I'm going then to start asking you questions because I've got only 30 minutes to do that. And then the rest of the period is for our viewers to actually ask you questions. Okay?
Okay, all right.
All right, then I'm just trying to sort out something here quickly. Technology sometimes has got a problem of not showing things the way one wants, but it's fine. Right, so the first question I'm going to pose to you, or I'm posing to you, Zoreyo, is what is the history of electromagnetic radiation? All right, because we are going to be talking about 5G, but we need to set a foundation. What is the history of electromagnetic radiation, more especially the role of that clever man called Maxwell, James Maxwell, and also the role of the other clever German guy called Rudolf Hertz?
Okay. For a start, I would like to clarify that electromagnetic radiation is actually a natural phenomenon. Okay. It's not something that was discovered by somebody, or should I say, it's not something that was invented by somebody, but rather it is a phenomenon that was discovered. You are right in saying that the person who actually played a key role in the discovery of electromagnetic radiation is a Scottish scientist by the name of James Clerk Maxwell. He actually, at the age of 31, published a paper by the name of A Dynamic Theory on the Electromagnetic Field. He was outlining for the first time the relationship between electricity and magnetism. Before, there was no apparent relation between these two phenomena, electricity and magnetism. So in the process of doing that, he correctly identified, for instance, visible light as just one example of electromagnetic radiation. All of these findings that he did, he expressed them in the form of 4 equations that have since got to be known as Maxwell's equations. So I'll just give a non-technical, outline of these 4 findings of Maxwell. Well, for a start, he highlighted the fact that electricity is dipole in nature. What does that mean? It means that electricity basically has got 2 types of charges. One labeled negative charges, and then the other one labeled positive, that is positive charges. So I'll give an example of a negatively charged particle being, for instance, an electron, and a positively charged particle, for instance, a proton. Maybe let me just highlight the fact that there's nothing positive about a positively charged particle or anything negative about a negatively charged particle. It's just a notation that was actually used for them. So what you then notice is that there are some electric field lines that originate on the positive electric charge and those electric field lines terminate on the negative electrically charged particle. The second finding was that magnetism is also dipole in nature. Again, these two poles of magnetism got labeled as a north pole and a south pole. Again, you've got magnetic field lines. Sorry, are we still there?
Yeah, no, I'm still here.
All right. Yes. You've got magnetic field lines, but now these magnetic field lines, very much like the electric field lines, they actually they are similar in the fact that they are field lines, but they, instead of starting on one charge and going to the other charge or pole to another pole, in this case, it's simply they make a loop. It's a closed loop, right? And then the third point that he identified was that a moving electric charge or a changing electric field generates a magnetic field. And then the fourth finding was that a changing magnetic field induces an electric field. So what is relevant to us is really these last 2 points. In that, if you then are able to generate artificially a changing electric field, that changing electric field will in turn generate a magnetic field. And if that magnetic field is also a changing magnetic field, it will also then in turn again generate a changing electric field. So what you can then have is actually a system that is self-perpetuating, whereby you've got an electric field generating a magnetic field generating an electric field. And that happens in perpetuity. That is what, in essence, is something that we call an electromagnetic radiation. This radiation caused by the electric field generating magnetic field generating electric field. And that happens in perpetuity. And then you've got a wave that then propagates through space as a result of that phenomenon at what is called the speed of light. So that is, in essence, so this thing of electromagnetic radiation, Maxwell did not in any way invent electromagnetic radiation. Rather, he discovered it. And he was able then to associate visible light as just another example of electromagnetic radiation. So we then, in 1887, got another gentleman who was a German physicist, as you have correctly pointed out, his name being Heinrich Rudolf Hertz. Now, what he did then was to demonstrate the reality of Maxwell's electromagnetic waves in a laboratory. Because you see, what Maxwell did was more of a paper, right, a scientific paper. But now it had to be demonstrated in a laboratory environment, which is what then Hertz did. So in honor of his outstanding work, a unit of measuring the frequency of a wave, which is really the cycle per second, was then named after him. In essence, we speak then of a hertz, and hertz being a cycle per second of a wave, right? What followed then from there was that you also had an Italian inventor by the name of Guglielmo Marconi, and then he's the one who then first exploited this discovery of electromagnetic radiation, whereby it could then be practically used in a radio transmitter environment. And that, in essence, ushered the era of radio communication as we know it, from around the year 1900.
Lovely.
Okay, did I miss anything about your question?
Yes. No. I think I'm happy. I hope the viewers are also happy. It's a bit technical, but we needed to start there, to explain the basics, which are actually even heavy. Though they are basics, they are heavy for people like us who did not study what you studied. So now that is electromagnetic radiation. The next question then is, we hear about something called electromagnetic spectrum. All right. What is electromagnetic spectrum?
Okay, you've already heard me making mention of the fact that part of the discovery of Maxwell was the fact that light was but part of electromagnetic radiation. So what this in essence means that there is more than light in what is called electromagnetic radiation, which then also means that you've got then a spectrum of radiation which constitute what we call electromagnetic radiation. And what differentiates it? In essence, there are two attributes of electromagnetic radiation that we look at, one being frequency and the other one being wavelength. It doesn't matter which of these two attributes you are looking at, it will tell you the same thing, in the sense that with the changing frequency of the electromagnetic radiation, you are then able to come into different types of electromagnetic radiation. Or we can put it the other way around. With the changing wavelength of the electromagnetic radiation, you are able then to identify different types of electromagnetic radiation. We're speaking here, for instance, about gamma rays. That's an example of electromagnetic radiation. Gamma rays. Gamma rays, they have an ultra high frequency in terms of the spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. Or put it differently, they have the smallest wavelength that you can get for electromagnetic radiation, followed by X-rays. X-rays are a bit lower in terms of frequency of electromagnetic radiation, followed by ultraviolet rays, UV. I think everybody knows about that. Followed by what we then know as the visible light spectrum. From there, followed by infrared radiation. From there, followed by microwave radiation. From there, followed by radio waves, going down then to what we refer to as long radio waves. So from the countdown that I've been making, in essence, I'm moving from high frequency electromagnetic radiation down to low frequency electromagnetic radiation. So that in essence constitutes what we refer to as the electromagnetic spectrum.
All right. So what you are saying is that based on the frequency, you are able to have different types of, radiations, basically, electromagnetic
Correct.
radiation. And if you are moving from the lowest frequency, you can then move from there, being on the left side, and all the way to the right, which is those with a higher frequency. And the higher the frequency, the shorter the wavelength. The bigger or the longer the wavelength, then the lower the frequency. Am I right?
You are basically right, yes. But one of the things that is very much common that I need to highlight is that irrespective of the frequency and the wavelength of these different spectra, right? One thing that remains constant, they are all traveling at the same speed, which is what is called the speed of light.
Okay, lovely,
yes.
Lovely. So in this spectrum, we normally then, hear that a certain part of the spectrum is dangerous, ionizing radiation, and then a certain part of the spectrum is not harmful. It's called non-ionizing. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Okay. If you don't mind, let me rather then describe let me rather describe ionizing radiation, because that is the one that does something, right?
Yeah.
So when we speak of ionizing radiation, in fact, ionization can be done either by radiation or a particle, but now we're talking about radiation. So ionizing radiation is basically when you have the radiation carrying sufficient energy, and that energy that it has is able to detach electrons from atoms or from molecules. That in essence is what it means. It carries sufficient energy to detach electrons from molecules or from atoms. I think from the previous discussion that we've already had, one can already deduce that perhaps the higher frequency radiation that we are talking about in the electromagnetic spectrum may be a candidate for what we are talking about. And if you come to that conclusion, you would be right in the sense that we're talking here about the likes of X-rays and gamma rays being the ones that have that ability to cause ionization of molecules or atoms. Now, how does that apply with respect to people? Maybe I'm jumping the gun here because perhaps you didn't ask the question.
No, that's fine. You can go ahead because you are telling us about ionizing. But maybe before we get to the people, you know, what is the effect of ionization on a molecule at that basic level?
Yes. As we've already said that it has that ability to detach an electron from a molecule or from an atom. Now, let's reference this thing with respect to human tissue.
Yes.
All right. Now, if that radiation has got the ability to detach electrons from the molecules that make human tissue, I think everybody can already deduce that you might have a problem. Now, let's take an example of, for instance, a cell, a human cell. We all know that within a human cell, you have the nucleus, and within the nucleus, you have the DNA, which carries the essential information for replication of that cell, right? And also for the identity of the cell, and also for replicating of that cell, you know, retaining its integrity. Now, if you have radiation that then has the ability to penetrate the human cell to the point that it gets to the DNA inside the nucleus and kick off some electrons within that DNA. Now, the risk that you have is that the DNA that was inside that nucleus could then be corrupted. You no longer have the molecule in integrity. It is corrupted. So if that molecule is corrupted and its nature is to replicate, now you have a corrupted molecule, which is DNA, replicating, but what it is replicating is now a corrupted version of itself. Then what you then have a situation where you can actually have what is called cancer. So that is the effect of ionizing radiation on human tissue or on human body. That is the danger or the harmful effect that it would have.
Right. So if we are looking at that spectrum then from low frequency to high frequency, at what point can one say this is the dangerous part now, the ionizing one, that can cause danger to a human cell? Below this one, exposure is unlikely to cause any damage to a human cell.
Okay, the perfect regions that I think I've already hinted to that. It's basically the gamma rays and X-rays, right? I know some people, you know, sometimes they dare each other to stick their heads inside, you know, a microwave oven while it's running. You know, don't do it. You are basically going to damage yourself. Like, so X-rays, gamma rays, they definitely cause ionization in human tissue. So they are dangerous or harmful in that sense, yes. And then to a certain extent, there is a certain region of UV, not all of it, a certain region of ultraviolet that also can cause ionization. But the definite candidates is gamma rays and X-rays.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay, so I think you've then explained how the high energy of the high frequency radiation waves can actually damage a cell, corrupt the molecule like a DNA, which may lead to, you know, a replication, which is a replication of an abnormal DNA, which may lead to cancer. I'm happy with that. Right, so now I am clear. The next question then is, I understand that there are bodies, you know, bodies in the United Nations that are responsible for governance around the issues of electromagnetic radiation. Can you just tell us, what do these people do? Because, you know,
Okay.
you've just told us that a certain part of this can actually be harmful and cause a lot of problems. Yet there is actually use for certain parts of the electromagnetic radiation. So these bodies, can you just tell us about these bodies?
Yes, there is actually a specialized agency of the United Nations, which is responsible for defining specifications for ICT. This body is called the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, which is based in Geneva. It actually has two, how would I call it, sectors within it that I would like to highlight. They are not the only ones, but I'd like to highlight those two. One of them is called the ITU-TR, and the other one is called the ITU-T. So it's the ITU-R and the ITU-T. The ITU-R within the ITU, which is the radio communication sector, it is involved in the global management of the radio frequency spectrum. We're talking here about the allocation of the spectrum and the restoration of frequency allocation, right? And that in use for services like fixed and mobile communications, broadcasting, space research, emergency telecommunications, meteorology, GPS, you know, environmental monitoring and communication services. So everything within the scope that I'm mentioning now, it is the ITUR that then allocates spectrum at a global level, right? And then the ITU-T then defines the specifications for specific technologies to use this spectrum. That, in essence, is what the ITU is all about, and it's two basically sectors.
Okay.
That is at a global level. So every country that is a member of the United Nations most probably is a participant of the ITU or a member of the ITU. For instance, South Africa, I know that it is. So what it actually means then that that country participates in the discussions around the allocation of spectrum. It also participates in the discussions around the definition of specifications for different technologies that use electromagnetic spectrum. All right. Yes. South Africa, as I say, it is part of that. So what it then means that if we're talking about 5G already, the spectrum that is used for 5G, not every country, let me put it this way, no country just wakes up on a particular day and say, we shall utilize a particular spectrum for 5G. If that country is a member of the ITU, as it is a member of the United Nations, then it has participated in one way or the other, or it then is obligated to utilize the guidelines of the ITU in terms of how it utilizes that spectrum or how it implements 5G in its own country. It uses basically the recommendations of the ITU.
So would I be right then that ICASA is that body in South Africa that actually, allocates spectrum, to be used for various purposes?
That would be correct. Yes, that would be correct. In our case here in South Africa, that body, which then has been mandated to manage our spectrum and allocate it accordingly, is actually ICASA. That is correct. Yes. So, for instance, mobile operators like Vodacom, MTN, Rain, Telkom, etc., when they need spectrum, either for 5G or for 3G or for 2G, they go to ICASA to get that spectrum.
Okay. I'm happy about that. I understand that there is also another body that is responsible for issues of health and safety usage of electromagnetic radiations, spectrum. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. There is also an organization, in short form, it is referred to as ICNEP. ICNEP is actually an independent non-profit organization, which is based in Munich, in Germany. It provides, in essence, scientific advice and guidance on the health and environmental effects of non-ionizing radiation. Not ionizing radiation, of non-ionizing radiation.
Yeah.
And it is important to note that it is not country specific. It utilizes experts from different countries, and those experts on different fields that include biology, epidemiology, medicine, physics, and chemistry. So you've got a multidisciplinary team from different countries coming up with these guidelines on the safe use of electromagnetic radiation, the non-ionizing aspect of it.
Lovely. All right. Now, just before we then get to the question and answer part, just to help us, we've heard of 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now we are talking 5G. Can you just briefly tell us, I mean, is it like, somebody like me, when the first Golf came to South Africa, I was already, in my teens, right? So is it like Golf 1, Golf 2, Golf 3, Golf 4, Golf 5, Golf, So what is the significance of this 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G?
Let me write on your example, because I think your example is very much relevant to what I'm going to say, because you are speaking here of a VW Golf.
Yeah.
However, you know that the VW Golf started as a Golf 1.
Yes.
And you had different iterations of the Golf, which were improvements of the Golf, up until the current version right now. I don't even know what it is, but until the current version right now, perhaps it's a Golf 6 or Golf 7, I don't know, but it remains a Golf. It remains a Golf. However, it changes, it improves, right? So what we are talking about here is exactly the same story. Our Golf now is actually mobile communications, right? Our mobile communications is now our Golf. In essence, there was a starting phase of mobile communications. For somebody who is as old as me, I will remember the era where you had people walking around carrying something that looked like a briefcase.
Yeah.
And that was their cellular phone.
Yeah.
Right. For those who remember that, that was 1G. All that box could do was to make phone calls. That's
so
it.
The phone that was there in 1994, during the first elections, democratic elections, those big phones, Ericsson's and all. So that was 1G.
That was 1G, but let us be clear. That was 1G for the GSM technology, right? Yeah. I'm not speaking for the other technologies that were implemented in other countries, but I'm talking about the GSM technology that was adopted in South Africa. That phone, that was 1G. All it could do was make phone calls. That was it. Make and receive phone calls. That was it. And then you had 2G. 2G was then an improvement from 1G, the first generation to second generation. Now, second generation, it retained that key aspect of being able to make voice calls. However, there were additional features introduced, like, for instance, the ability to make and receive SMSs. Now, that is a certain aspect of data now being introduced in the technology. And also, the phones could have some limited capability to transmit data. There was a 9.6 kilobits per second ability that those phones had. So, if you were, patient enough to, to wait for the download speeds, you could utilize it. Most people didn't use it. I don't even think they were aware of it, right? Because it was very impractical, very slow. But that was the evolution of technology, 2G. Now, then came the third generation, 3G. Now, 3G was in fact, maybe before we go to 3G, there was a step between 2G and 3G, which was called 2.5G. That one was when we started to introduce proper data into mobile communications. This is the era of GPRS. If people remember, the era of GPRS. a little bit faster than the data of 2G, but not fast enough. You could still do a little bit of data, but it was not too practical. Still, the era of GPRS, that was 2.5G. And then you had 3G proper. Now in 3G proper, it was then an improvement on 2.5G, in the sense that the core network of 2G was of 2.5G on the data side of things was retained. However, there were improvements now on the access network side of the technology, so that on the access network side of things, things were a bit faster. All right. So that was in essence then when we got into the 3G era. So a huge departure from 2G, in the sense that there were now changes, significant changes on the access network. And then you got into the 4G era, the LTE era, for those who are aware of it, the LTE era, the HSPA era, that is the 4G era. And then what we're talking about now, 5G, which is the technology that is currently being implemented as a new technology by most telecommunications mobile operators around the world. Yes. So that is, so if I have to outline, this evolution was, if you can see it, it was driven more by data. What was really improving was the data aspect of things. The voice aspect remained. The voice aspect remained, even though as you went through 3G, 4G, 5G, you now also had a situation where even voice started to be carried onto the data side of the network. Then you had what is normally called voice over IP being implemented on a mobile telecommunications network. Yes. So that in essence is the evolution that happened from 1G up until 5G as we speak.
So what's special then now about 5G? You know, what practical uses is it promising, or that those countries that have already implemented it, you know, are actually boasting about?
Yes, taking again your example of the Gulf, you know, the users of the Gulf, much as that they loved it, there were certain limitations that they actually identified about the Gulf. You know, like we're talking about a Golf 4 to a Golf 5 here, if you allow me. So your Golf 4, you know, had certain limitations, and so the manufacturers thought it necessary then to come up with a Golf 5 version, you know. And so our 5G version of the mobile telecommunications network has got some advantages over 4G. One of the advantages is that obviously it has more speed, right? That is what it promises, or that is what it delivers. The promise is that whatever speed that you could get on 4G, it can deliver 10 times that, in essence, right? That is the first advantage. The second advantage is something that maybe a lot of people would not necessarily, you know, be aware of. But however, in a communication such as the one that we're having right now, that as we speak now, that aspect, you know, can be very much evident. We are having a live conversation, you and I. However, what somebody can certainly notice is that there is no proper sync or synchronization between the voice and the picture. You know, you say something, but your lips say something a little bit later. You see, yes. So that aspect is what is called latency. All right. So even in 4G, there is still latency that users found to be unacceptable for certain applications. So what then 5G promises is to offer better latency. As an example, the design specification for 5G says that it can offer a 1 millisecond latency. Now, you may not appreciate that, but let me just give an example here that human reaction time to visual stimulus on average is about 250 milliseconds, right? When something stimulates you visually, you will respond at best 250 milliseconds later. or put it differently, a quarter of a second later. Now, 5G promises that it will give you a latency of 1 millisecond. I don't know, 1 millisecond, I don't have, basically 1 millisecond is way, way faster than 250 milliseconds. So it offers a latency that is way, way better than what even a human being can respond in terms of reaction times. Yes. So the advantage of that is that now you have certain applications that you can implement, with 5G that you could not necessarily implement in 4G. But you have not asked about that yet. So
for example.
Okay. Immersive virtual reality gaming. That would be the example, right? It promises that, you would then have real-time immersive virtual reality gaming, and then it will be giving that basically to the ordinary man on the street. So with the implementation of 5G, you are most likely then to see, this type of gaming being available or being utilized by more people, when it was in fact something that was used by certain computer geeks at the present moment. But it will be something that will become more available to the general population. Another example, which is less of entertainment and more something serious, remote surgical operations. Now, you don't want a situation where when a doctor is doing remote surgery and he's got to cut a little bit next to a particular nerve, and he's obviously watching what he's doing via a camera. You want him to know the movement of that knife as real time as possible, because if the movement of the knife is delayed, his seeing of the movement of the knife is delayed from what he sees versus what actually happens. He could end up maybe even severing that nerve or cutting that blood vessel or whatever. So it has to be real time. So that is another application where you would find it. Another application would be vehicle to vehicle communication. What is now referred to generally as the Internet of Things, where things speak to each other over the internet. So you can also have a situation where vehicles are speaking to the other vehicles without any human intervention. Let's say those vehicles are traveling at high speed, but you want to make sure that whatever communication and that happens between the two of them takes into consideration or is fast enough, considering the fact that they are traveling at high speeds. You can only achieve that if your method of communication is also that fast enough and has got very, very low latency. Yes. So those will be the examples of the usage of 5G.
All right. So in that spectrum you spoke about, where would you then put 5G? Is it on the safe side or on the dangerous side? I know.
No.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I would like to say that definitely, the 5G spectrum, what has been agreed to be used for 5G, is definitely on the safe side of things. Yes. Yeah. However, as we've already spoken about ICNEP, part of those guidelines that it has developed, those guidelines are based on what is referred to as a precautionary principle. That is, much as we are aware that the spectrum that is being used is safe, that is, it is non-ionizing. However, we take every possible precaution not to unnecessarily or expose people on that radiation. And therefore, there are certain safety standards that they develop that network operators or those who manufacture devices that uses this radiation will ensure that there is just no risk of that radiation causing any harmful effects on the using human beings.
Okay, lovely. Last question. I promise the last one. We are hearing from the social media that there's something called 7G. Have we got to that level already? You know, I mean, the stuff that we are hearing on the social media, people are talking about China 7G and all of that. Is that the truth?
Okay. Well, I think that that is something that everyone can independently verify, in the sense that I've already hinted that the global body that defines the standards for mobile communications and that also develops the specifications for it is the ITU. So what one would simply have to do is to go to the ITU and find out what is the latest specification that they have for mobile communications. And well, I've done that type of homework.
Yeah.
The latest specification that the ITU has is 5G. Okay. Obviously, because we are already at the stage of implementing 5G, they are already thinking about 6G. Right. But that technology is not yet pinned down in terms of specifications. It's still general, high up in the air, right? So the short answer to your question is that there is no 7G in terms of mobile communication, no 8G, no 9G. No. Yes, everywhere, because you will not have, for instance, China having their own 7G. China is the member of the United Nations and therefore a member of the ITU. So they will not develop their own specification, knowing very well that the rest of the world is sitting at 5G.
Lovely.
But that doesn't, however, that doesn't stop anyone from doing R&D on possible solutions beyond 5G. But there is no specification called 6G, 7G, 8G. None whatsoever. The only specification, formal specification that is there is 5G.
Lovely. I think let's take the questions now. Nwabisa, please pose questions to Mr. Nyati.
Hi, Doc, and hi, Mr. Langa Nyati. On Facebook, we don't have any questions. We just have appreciation from Oman Lahadebe. He says the explanation that Mr. Langa gave regarding the electromagnetic radiation was beautifully put. And Oli Swakakana says, I so love the golf analogy. And Robin Maredi also says a good question. This is with reference to when Doc asked about the differences between 1G to 5G. So for now, there are no questions.
Okay, all right. There's something in that phone of yours that I wanted to pose on Mr. Langa Nyati. I asked you to just forward that. But let me pose the question though. Remember, the trigger for this discussion is the prevalence of information that is circulating in our social media platforms about 5G and its association with COVID-19 and other claims, you know. So we are here to talk openly about these things and actually check credibility from a scientific point of view, because a number of people who are circulating these videos have got no clue of what they're talking about. All right. So I'm talking about a number of them. There may be those who know. So I wanted those questions to be posed to somebody who studied this thing, so that we can then be able to have engagements, about facts and not just, hearsay. But anyway, let me pose one of those questions that are circulating. One, there is something about Bill Gates, all right? There is something about Bill Gates and his involvement in this pandemic and other things. Mr. Nyati is aware of it, all right? So can you just try and answer that question, Mr. Langa Nyati?
Yes. There are aspects of this question that I will not be able to answer. Okay. The reason why I will not be able to answer is because they would touch on an area that I am not knowledgeable about.
Okay.
I'm talking here, for instance, about the issues of vaccines, right?
Okay, no, I'm there to talk
yes.
about those ones.
Yes, all right, all right. However, if we are speaking about the claims or the conspiracy theories around the fact that Mr. Bill Gates is using COVID-19 as an excuse to microchip people, thereby fulfilling what is in the revelations, in the biblical revelations, whereby I think I'm not an expert here as well. That I think there is something about the number of the number of the beast 666, which he then it is alleged that he is intending to imprint on each and every human being who then takes the vaccine. And also there is an issue about the fact that the process somehow is going to alter the human DNA. I think if I'm being correct, the conspiracy theory is around that.
So can you help us then around that?
Okay, well, you see, the conspiracy theories, for them to be successful, there has to be a little measure of truth in what they say. Okay, yes. And then they take that little bit of truth, then they basically wrap around a lot of lies around it. Okay, now what am I talking about? Of course, I think there was a session that Mr. Bill Gates had, I think sometime last year, which was more of an open mic situation where he actually allowed people, you know, to ask him a lot of questions, and he spoke a lot of issues around the issue of vaccine. Now, I believe that one of the areas that he was talking about was the issue of people assuming that there is a vaccine and people have taken the vaccine. And so you would like those people who have taken the vaccine, who are now safe, to be able to freely go back to the workspace, to their work environments, and interact with other human beings, and somehow be able to manage that situation of vaccinated and non-vaccinated people, you know, how they interact, right? So I think he did mull over that situation. And I think he even went to the extent of talking about in future, there may be some digital certificates that would then need to be employed, you know, to implement this thing, right? Now, conspiracy theorists then took that statement. I'm obviously not quoting him verbatim, but I'm taking the essence of how I understand what he said. Conspiracy theorists took that discussion of his and then wrapped around it a lot of lies, which in essence say that then it means that he intends to inject some microchip within people to then, you know, implement this 666 thing on people. He never said anything of the sort. In fact, to kind of complicate things a little bit further, I am of the understanding that there is also a technology which is called a quantum dot die. Now, and I believe that this technology is something that his foundation had somehow sponsored. Now, people are then taking this issue of this quantum dot die as evidence of this technology that Bill Gates is going to use. But from what I'm understanding, that thing of the quantum dot die has got nothing to do with the microchip, but it is a technology that is still being at its infancy stage, still being investigated as to whether it can actually be able to be used for the issue of digital certificates. So again, it's a little grain of truth in that indeed there's quantum dot die technology, that he spoke about the issue of people being able to know or manage those who have been vaccinated versus those who are not, and then taking all of that to say that then he has a plan that is being implemented to, to microchip people, which is in essence not true. Yes.
Okay. So he was speaking as a futurist, saying in 5 years, in 10 years, like we are saying, in 5 years' time, there may be autonomous, vehicles that can drive themselves without a human being inside to deliver things. And we also know that there are already companies that are doing R&D in that space, so that in 5 years or 10 years, there may be driverless vehicles, right? But
correct,
those have not yet been implemented, right? So
correct,
futurists, that's what they do, all right? Futurists,
correct.
That's what they do. They look at possibilities in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, to say what would, be the likely usage of a particular technology that has evolved.
That is correct. That is
right?
correct, yes.
But when you are saying that, you are not saying it is there. And you may be wrong.
Indeed, because much as the fact that they have actually funded the research on this quantum dot die technology, there is as I mean, the little research that I've done is where I could even get the opinions of people who are actually involved in this research, and they are saying that they are not aware in any way of this technology being considered or being used, for digital certificates in human beings, and definitely it is not something that can be injected on human beings as a microchip. So so if people can just if when they encounter these things, not take it at face value, but just dig a little bit deeper. Luckily nowadays, there is various facilities, for cross-checking, the validity of certain statements or documents or whatever. And you can easily get to the bottom line as to whether it's true or not, because those things actually get investigated.
All right. Now, yesterday, I had an Ask Dr. Fundi session here, and the focus was about vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines. Okay. And I took questions from people about vaccination, in general, but also COVID-19 vaccines.
Yes.
And I asked people to pose questions, any question around issues of COVID-19 vaccines. Now, so to add to your point around vaccines are biological, they are biological products that are manufactured by pharmaceutical companies, right?
Yes.
With a specific aim of ensuring that there is artificial or acquired immunity to a particular germ that causes a disease. Let me start again. Vaccines are products, biological products, that are produced by pharmaceutical companies after a lot of research has been done. And those biological products, they have to go through a number of stages, preclinical stages in the lab, and also clinical stages, that is, testing on humans, all right? Sometimes even animals at the lab, all right? Now, for human trials to be conducted, the researchers have to write a protocol that details exactly what is it that they are going to do, every little detail of what they are going to do, what they are going to use. And that is then submitted to ethical committees so that they can look at the merits of that particular, protocol that is going to guide the research. All right. And in particular, they look at issues of safety and also issues of effectiveness. Now, those are independent bodies, that actually sit and, consider proposals for research, especially, the human trials, but even the preclinical ones. There is no way that ethical committees that approve research would allow for any microchips to be included in a vaccine. Anyway, a vaccine is a biological thing. There is no way there could be a coexistence between a biological thing and a microchip. You get me? Right?
Yes.
Right? There is no way they would even get approval to start doing this thing at the lab. All right? And again, the focus is on safety of the human beings who will, use that particular vaccine, and also effectiveness. Now, there are clinical trials, what we call, human clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 being research at a small, amount of people, that uses a small amount of people, looking at issues of safety. That's the first thing. Safety of human beings that will make use of this vaccine. And if it does not pass that, because there is potential danger to human beings, it won't go to phase 2. Phase 2 is about safety and effectiveness on a slightly larger number of people. And in between the phase 1 and the phase 2, they have to submit all the data to be interrogated to see whether this thing should be allowed to go to phase 2. All right, phase 2 being a slightly more number of people, safety and effectiveness. And then if it passes that, it goes to phase 3. Phase 3 is a much more bigger number of people, tens of thousands of people, which may be, within the same country in many sites, or across many sites, across the globe. And again, it's about safety, it's about effectiveness. So the technologies that the 3 first vaccines that have now been approved, the one from Pfizer and BioNTech, the one from Moderna, and the one from AstraZeneca, they are using a new vaccine technology called mRNA. There is no chip there. There's no microchip. All right. It is a messenger RNA. All right. They take, that information in the RNA, create a vaccine out of that, and that mRNA is then injected intramuscularly onto a person. And once that gets to the body, it goes into the body cells and teaches the body cells. It's a protein. It teaches, it teaches the body cells to produce a harmless protein called spike protein, which is the protein that you find on the outer surface of the COVID-19, germ, which is SARS-CoV-2 germ. So once the mRNA has passed on the information to the body cells to produce this protein called the spike protein, which is harmless, the immune system recognizes this foreign protein and then develops a defense against that, which then, when you are exposed to the real germ later on, then the body will immediately shoot on sight and destroy that COVID-19 germ. Now, this is a biological thing. There is no chip there. And the first one in fact, the first two, Pfizer and the Moderna one, they've got effectiveness of about 94, 95%. Meaning, if anyone has got that injection, they've got 94, 95% effectiveness that it will protect them should they be exposed to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Okay. Then the third one by AstraZeneca has got a slightly lower effectiveness of about 70%. Okay, but that's still good enough because they were aiming at anything above 50. So 70% is still good enough. But all three of these vaccines, it's double, you get 2 doses, first dose, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, a second dose. All right. So that then the body has got enough of the ability to fight any COVID-19 germ that a person has been exposed to. Okay, and from a safety point, they have been found, all three of these have been found to be safe. No one has died directly as a result of the vaccine. By yesterday, about 18 million people throughout the world had already been vaccinated using one of these 3 vaccines in 39 countries across the world. When it comes to adverse effects, there were no major adverse effects except a bit of a headache here, a bit of a raised body temperature here, a little bit of itching, or a bit of induration or a bit of swelling around where the injection was given. Nothing more. There was nothing that was, like anaphylactic shock, where a person gets to be shocked because of a body's reaction to these things. So I'm sharing this information to say there is no ethical body that is involved in human research that would allow vaccines, which are biological products, to be included with a chip. So I hope that puts this to the side. The second question is around the Rockefeller family. Okay. There's also another, question around, New World Order, Rockefeller family, and whatever. I'm sure you have that. Can you maybe just tell us what is it that they are saying in these conspiracy theories about this Rockefeller family and New World Order and all of that?
Okay. I think before I get into that, if you can indulge me, I just want to draw some parallels between Mr. Bill Gates, William Henry Gates, and John Davidson Rockefeller, John D, as he used to be called. Mr. Rockefeller, he obviously lived a long time ago. I think he died in 1937. Whereas Bill Gates, I mean, he was born in 1955, so he's still somebody who's still very active in our society. But there are some few commonalities between the 2 individuals. For a start, if I go back to John D, he is widely considered to be the wealthiest American of all time and the richest person in modern history. His net worth was around 480 billion in 1913, and that obviously that figure is based on the dollar, the dollar in 2019. But what it means that his net worth then in 1913 was equivalent to 418 billion US dollars in 2019. Yes. He made his money from the company that he established called Standard Oil Company. So he was a rich fellow by all standards. Let's go to Mr. Bill Gates. His net worth, I think right now he's sitting 4th in terms of the people who are currently in terms of net worth.
Trailing our South African export, Elon Musk at #1.
Indeed, he's sitting at #4 at 120.3 billion. That was around 25th of December in 2020. I think we should be very proud of Mr. Musk, by the way. He's really done us good. So these two individuals, are extremely rich individuals, both of them, Bill Gates and John D. Rockefeller. Both of them entrepreneurs. They made their money out of being entrepreneurs. John D. He made his money basically with Standard Oil Company at the very beginning of the oil industry in the US. So he was actually quite good in what he did, that he was able to to make a company that was so big, and he made a lot of money for himself. Similarly, Bill Gates, he made his money out of Microsoft, obviously Microsoft Windows, right? Now both guys, their companies grew to the point where they started to attract some problems on antitrust laws. As an example, Standard Oil Company by John D., it ended up being broken down into, I think, 34 little other companies due to antitrust laws. And we know that also Bill Gates, he also suffered some problems around, the Microsoft product and around the whole issue of antitrust laws. Both individuals, they relinquished, being actively involved in their companies at some stage, and both individuals started focusing, on activities that have to do with helping out, their fellow human beings. So that's what Bill Gates is doing now with his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That's what Rockefeller did with respect to his Rockefeller Foundation, which started in 1913. And they are pouring a lot of money, into the causes that they are involved in. Same thing was the case with Rockefeller. Same thing that Bill Gates is doing with the activities that he's involved in. These are the people who are really making a lot of difference in the world.
Positive difference or negative difference.
Indeed. But now that is the thing. There's the flip side of it. You then attract a lot of negativity. I think that's part of it. Now, going into the issue then of the Rockefeller Foundation, because it's not even about the Rockefeller family, it's about the Rockefeller Foundation. In 2010, when I did a little bit of research around this, in 2010, the Rockefeller Foundation commissioned a study and developed a document which looked at a number of scenarios. In fact, they titled the document Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. That's what they titled their document. And in that document, they were looking at different future scenarios in the next 15 to 30 years, I think.
Yes.
Looking at different scenarios as to how each of these scenarios that they were looking at could impact the future of technology. Yes. And its international development. That's what the essence of the study was all about. So they came up with 4 scenarios in that document, and they actually labeled those 4 scenarios. One of them they called it lockstep. The other one they called it clever together. The other one they called it hack attack. The other one they called it smart scramble. Right. And of course, with the definition as to what each one means. Right.
Yes. So that was part of scenario planning.
Scenario planning, correct.
Yes.
Correct.
And then you're looking at different possibilities, or different scenarios that may play out in the future.
Yes. Now, maybe their sin was that in one of those scenarios, which is the lockstep scenario, they outlined a scenario where there may be a pandemic, right? But the pandemic that they were looking at was a pandemic that would affect Africa, Southeast Asia, as well as South America. So if you are saying that they did some accurate projection, they kind of got it wrong, because if you look at COVID-19, it's not affecting Africa as it is affecting Europe and America. But in their scenario, they were looking at a pandemic that would affect America, Southeast Asia, and South America, right?
Yes.
And in this scenario, they were looking at something that would happen around the year 2012.
Yeah.
So they kind of missed it between 2012, if you are trying to make a link. And what they were talking about there, when you look at the document, when they're outlining that scenario, there's absolutely nothing that speaks about something close to COVID-19. The pandemic that they are talking about is something that is actually similar to SARS. Sorry, not SARS, N1H1.
Yes.
Remember the N1H1, yes. So they're talking about something similar, because around the time that they wrote the document, the only kind of pandemic that they were aware of was the N1H1 that just happened, I think, a few years before.
Yes.
Yes. So the N1H1 influenza virus. So they were building a scenario based on what they already know. So they were saying, if this were to happen in 2012,
a respiratory, a germ that affects the respiratory system,
exactly,
it may cause a pandemic, that can be difficult to control.
Yes, and then basically saying, if you have a scenario like that, how would it influence the future of technology and international development?
Yes.
You see, that is the context of the study. And if anybody can actually download this document and read what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
There was nothing that makes references to 5G, nothing that makes reference to COVID-19. It was just what I'm talking about. But somehow, I've actually looked at the guy who was the originator of this conspiracy. Yeah. They've actually made a copy of this page, of the front page of this document, and somehow, lead people into thinking that all of these things that they are talking about are actually in the document. So it's a lie.
Yes. All right.
Yes.
There's somebody who has asked me a question earlier, is there an association between COVID-19 pandemic and 5G?
Okay. I think that's basically what we're here all about. The simple answer is no. There is none whatsoever. Why am I saying that? I'm hoping that, and I think you've done it correctly in that at the very beginning, we actually clarified the issue of electromagnetic radiation. We spoke about the issue of 5G. And I think one can deduce that from my description of 5G, and I think anybody can go to the ITU and get the specifications of 5G as to how it works.
Maybe you just tell us those specifications, the ones that were agreed to in Egypt in 2019 October.
Okay, in fact that one by the World Radio Forum, they were talking more about which spectrum. They were trying to agree to get consensus on which spectrum to be utilized for 5G. Yes. So there were a number of spectrum options that were looked at. A number of spectrum options that were looked at. In terms of what those spectrum options were, they were various. They were various. Let me just give you an example of what they were. They were looking, for instance, at 24 gigahertz spectrum as the possible spectrum that could be used for 5G. They were also looking at around 40 gigahertz spectrum for the use of 5G. They were also looking at 66 gigahertz spectrum and 50 gigahertz spectrum. They were also saying that they might as well look at some other spectrum below 1 gigahertz. And also between 6 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz, etc. So there were a number of options that they were looking at, right,
but
to
all
get
of
consensus.
them are on the non-ionizing radiation part of the spectrum.
That is correct, yes. And I'm hoping that with the discussion that we've had right now around the issue of spectrum and electromagnetic radiation, one can appreciate the fact that you are simply talking here about a natural phenomenon that is made of electric and magnetic waves. It is not an alive thing. It is not, it's simply energy. It is energy. It is not alive. So there is no way that you can take electromagnetic radiation and somehow convert it into a virus. Because a virus, if I understand, it's a biological entity. Whereas electromagnetic radiation, it's energy, it's pure energy. So there is no way that electromagnetic radiation can somehow convert and become a virus. So the long and short of it is that there is no relation whatsoever between 5G, the spectrum that it utilizes, and COVID-19. There is just no way you can make a logical connection between the two, none whatsoever.
Right. In fact, to back up what you've just said, one of the officials or researchers for the Department of Arts, Culture and Media in the UK actually said viruses are living organisms. They invade human and animal cells so that they can reproduce and cause an infection, all right, when they reproduce. So SARS-CoV-2 is a new virus from the coronavirus family. It invades a human, looks for cells to actually hijack, human cells, especially those that have got a receptor that is called ACE receptors, because it attaches better. It attaches on those ACE receptors, and the respiratory system tends to have a lot of those, receptors, as well as the kidneys, as well as the GIT, gastrointestinal system. So a virus invades a human cell, hijacks it, reproduces, and then that becomes an infection. However, a virus cannot live outside of a living thing. All right. Now, electromagnetic radiation or 5G is not a living thing. It's not, it's not a living thing. There's no way a virus can survive outside of that living thing. All right. So I thought I needed to just share that with you. Also, there's another guy, Stephen Hughes, also from the UK. He said, this thing about COVID-19 and association with 5G is the worst kind of fake news. All right? It is complete rubbish and biologically impossible. All right? These are top scientists in the globe, So yeah, I thought I needed to say that. Now, in the past week, we have heard of people in some of the townships in KZN who actually started doing what was done in Birmingham in April. In Birmingham in April in the UK, you started seeing some people based on these conspiracy theories going and destroying the towers with 5G technologies, because they were made to believe that indeed these things are not good for humanity. So we've just had a situation like that in KZN after some municipal official or councillor actually propagated that kind of information. So what, to your knowledge, and maybe let's start from 2G, because you were involved during the 2G stages installing towers for Vodacom. Okay. What was my ultimate question is, those towers next to one's house, how dangerous are they in terms of electromagnetic radiation? And the cell phones we carry in our hands, how dangerous are they in terms of electromagnetic radiation?
Yes. Well, to be fair to the network operator you are speaking about, I don't want to focus on them specifically.
Okay. Let's talk in general. Let's talk in general, not necessarily Vodacom. Yeah.
Yes. In general, in South Africa, all of the network operators, they are building networks that are based on the ITU specifications. That is the first thing that I have to mention. Right. That is the first thing. The second thing, the spectrum that they use to make those services available to the population has been allocated to them by ICASA, which is a government entity. The third thing that I would like to mention is that when they deploy their towers, part of the deployment strategy of towers takes into consideration the guidelines of ICNEP. I know that as a fact. So they believe strongly in the precautionary principle. For instance, you will notice that they will not deploy towers inside schools. They will not deploy towers in hospitals, as an example. I'm talking about the macro towers now. They will not deploy them. Why? Because they are simply following the precautionary principle that despite the fact that there's been no evidence to say that cell phone towers and their radiation can cause harm. However, we need to make sure that we operate by the safety standards of ICNEP, which call on us to have a precautionary approach to the deployment of towers. All of them, in my understanding, they follow those ICNEP guidelines. Then we go to the issue of the devices, the cell phones. The cell phones, again, obviously, most of the cell phones that we are currently using are not South African products. We're talking here the Samsungs, we're talking here about the iPhones, etc. They're not South African products. There again, these manufacturers are building their phones based on the ITU specifications. They, as manufacturers of devices, are members of the ITU. They sit around with other people who are also participants in the ITU to develop the specifications for these technologies, right? So they are building not on their own specification, but on a specification of a body that is not them, but which they participate on. And so these standards have not been proven to be harmful in any particular way. So the cell phones are simply not dangerous to the human being as well, because again, the precautionary principle of ICNEP is again being applied when it comes to the development of the cell phones. Both the networks and the cell phone devices, both of them, those who are deploying them or manufacturing them, follow the precautionary principle.
So therefore, to scare people and say 5G towers are going to give them COVID-19 is hogwash.
It is hogwash, and besides, I would be interested to see how would somebody be able to identify that a particular tower is actually a 5G tower, because it's not written 5G anyway. So how would they know? I'm not sure how they came to the conclusion that a particular tower is actually 5G towers, because the same tower which has got 2G technology, which is still running, by the way, has got 3G technology still running, has got 4G technology still running, and then in specific towers, they introduce 5G, right? Now, how do you know that that tower already has got 5G? If you just look at it, how do you know? So I think it's just a mob of people who are just acting on, not thinking and just causing destruction.
Lovely, lovely. So basically, they were misinformed. They were misinformed by somebody who was misinformed. And that person has got an ability to mobilize. So he mobilized on a wrong thing, basically. And people started attacking, those towers. Right. Yeah. Now, there is a question here. It's coming from Sakele Ndabeni. He's saying, how dangerous are the high voltage electricity boxes installed by Eskom in our households? I'm not sure if it's your area of expertise, this one. Utsepo Matlaba would have been the ideal person to answer this one.
Correct. I think, as you have already rightly pointed, in terms of my work, yes, my experience, I have not in any way, much as that in my training at university, I got exposed to high current electrical engineering. I have never been trained in high current electricity at all. And therefore, I would be very much reluctant to comment on anything that has to do with heavy current electricity.
All right. Now, what I will do, I'm going to pass this question to another friend of mine, who's an expert when it comes to, this space of heavy current. And so I will just write to Sakele at a different time. Terra Nyati, he's asking a question. Why does the ICASA take so long to release spectrum?
Okay. Interesting. I'm assuming here that Terra is referring to the issue of the spectrum that is intended to be used for 5G.
I'm not sure which spectrum he's talking about, but he's just saying, why does it take ICASA so long to release the spectrum?
Okay. Now, I do know that at this point in time, there is indeed an issue around the availability of 5G spectrum. Hence, I'm making that assumption that he's referring to that. Now, if he is referring to that, the problem that we have here in South Africa is that the spectrum that the ITU has allocated for 5G is currently being occupied by other old technologies here in South Africa. Right. I'm referring here to the old TV broadcasts, right? The old TV broadcasts by Centec. Now, those TV broadcasts by Centec on behalf of the SABC, they are utilizing the spectrum that is now allocated for 5G. So what it means is that for that spectrum to be available for 5G, it would be necessary that, first of all, Centec, or should I say SABC, must vacate that spectrum from using it for the old television broadcasts.
Analog.
It must vacate it. Yes, they must migrate to somewhere else so that the vacated spectrum can then be utilized for 5G. That is really where the problem is. The problem, somehow, ICASA, much as that they've got a plan for migration. I'm not sure if people know about the issue of the set-top boxes, but that is part of the plan, right? Unfortunately, that ICASA plan for migrating television broadcasts is taking too long. As to why it's taking too long, I am not sure.
It needs to be authorized at the top. There's some political decisions that need to be made.
Yes. So the issue really then, if we have to look at it from the spectrum point of view, simply ICASA is not making that spectrum available fast enough to be utilized. That is
that could be the reason then to answer Terra on the delays in the release of spectrum.
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right. There's a lady, Nokutula Mandlovu Mtetwa, who's saying, will there be antibody monitoring for healthcare workers like we have with hepatitis B vaccine? You see now, today we are not talking vaccines. Today we're talking 5G. So I'm reluctant to answer stuff that has to do with a topic that we handled yesterday. But anyway, let me just say that, you know, obviously, when people have been, you know, vaccinated, there is going to be a register, a national digital register of everyone in South Africa who has been vaccinated, and also everyone in South Africa who has refused vaccination. And there will also be a, you know, a record keeping of all adverse effects relating to vaccination, any adverse effect. All right, because it doesn't end at phase 3, you know, the monitoring of the effectiveness and safety. There's also what we call phase 4 of these human trials. And so there will be a monitoring. Now, to come back to her question, will there be antibody monitoring for healthcare workers like we have with hepatitis B? When somebody has been vaccinated successfully, the intention is that then they must develop their own immunity. And that immunity is in different forms. There is the antibody side, you know, and here we are talking, you know, IgG, you know, immunoglobulin G, which are the more long-term type of antibodies as compared to IgM, which is the more acute type of antibodies that are normally, you know, that are normally there in the first 7 to 14 days, and then they disappear. And IgG becomes the one that stays for longer. So her question then is, will people be monitored for that immunity, you know, over time, like it is done when people are given a hepatitis B vaccine? You know, I had a look at, you know, the rollout plan and all of that. There will be monitoring generally, but I did not specifically see anything around antibody monitoring. So I don't want to, you know, commit there. All right. There's still another scientific issue that has not yet been addressed by all of the studies that have been done. A scientific issue of how long is the immunity that people are going to get from being vaccinated. That question, the studies are still, you know, over a short period to be able to give us answers. We have seen already from people who got infected in the first quarter of last year that some of them still had evidence of immunity, you know, 9 months later. But other people within 3 months of having been infected, the immunity was no longer there. So about the vaccines themselves, we don't have the answer as yet, and therefore it is something that I think the minister will, you know, and his ministerial advisory committee and the experts, they will announce once there is evidence around how long the immunity stays, and obviously what they will be monitoring around that is the IgG, which is the more long-term type of immunity. I hope that answers the question by Nogutula Tetwa. Sakele Ndabeni is asking another question. Any plans of translating your helpful health topics to either Xhosa or all indigenous languages? I've always been concerned about people in the rural communities who die in numbers because they are not considered. You know, as somebody who comes from rural areas, I'm from Tabase, 21 kilometers outside of Mthatha. I am proud product of that rural area. And as I'm talking now, I'm talking to my brother who is actually in our ancestral home at Tabase Mthatha. And he's speaking in English. So this notion that people who are in rural areas cannot speak English, you know, sometimes I've got a bit of a challenge because quite a number of people who have been game changers, whether in industry or in government, actually you can trace them to rural areas. So I don't understand this thing that people say, people in rural communities are almost like illiterate. Having said that, there's a high percentage of people in places like rural areas and townships who are not literate. But I think the blanket statement about rural, communities, is a bit of a problem. The answer, though, is that I started this Dr. Fundi channel in the middle of March last year. And one of the things I identified was the fact that there was a big vacuum in public health education, focusing on sharing information in vernacular. So as a result of that, I then developed videos like these ones, in Xhosa, in Sepedi, in Chivenda, in Southern Sotho, about 5 different, vernacular, languages in South Africa. And I was actually happy when I attended this online meeting with the ministers and other prominent people a few days ago, because this is another issue that was, highlighted, that public health education is not offered in accessible language or in people's mother tongues. So anyway, about me, I will continue to do a little bit from my side, but this is something I'm doing without any revenue relating to this. So this is just a side issue that I'm doing to try and fill in the vacuum. So I will try and do my bit in my little corner. And I'll also be resharing all the videos that I had done in Venda, Sepedi, Southern Sotho, Xhosa, on my timeline, so that people can get, access to that kind of information. Obviously, at that time, we were not yet talking vaccination. So I might need to do ones that are specific to vaccination in the different languages, so that can then be used in relation to the other ones to give people information in their normal, or mother tongue. Okay, is there any other question, Nwabisa?
Yes, Doc, there's just one question from Sabelo Savimbi Danjana. He's asking, what can be done to educate communities about 5G so that they don't just believe in these conspiracies? And an informed community would play a great role in trying to leapfrog the previous industrial revolutions and catch up with their 4IR.
Yes. Thank you. Is it Musabelo, ne?
Musabelo, yes, Sabelo Savimbi.
Yeah. Thank you, Sabelo, about that question. Again, I hope people are not going to think that I'm name dropping and whatever, but I have to mention the fact that I was in this online meeting, with the president and the ministers, and chaired by Uncle Gwizi, and it was about it was an ANC online thing. It was about sharing about the COVID-19 response, and also about the vaccination program that is coming. But at the end, one of the things that came out strongly was that the government needs to do more in public health education using mother tongue. And the issue of 5G and the conspiracies around it was highlighted as one issue that must be tackled ASAP. Minister of Health, Dr. Zwelini Lawrence Mkhize, made a commitment there that they will be, coming up with, an education program to try and counter the misinformation around 5G, COVID-19, and vaccines. So that is definitely something that's going to happen. Department of Health working closely with the Department of Communication, GCIS, and the provincial health departments. So I think that's all I can say for now. There's commitment at that level that the vacuum, because nature does not allow for vacuum. So whenever there's a vacuum, then others will occupy that vacuum. And in this instance, there is a vacuum on public health education of the masses of the people of this country. And so that vacuum is now being filled in by conspiracy theorists within the social media platforms. And it has to be countered. And what I'm doing today, what I did yesterday, is part of actually trying to, give credible information to counter, and the videos that we are taking here are going to be available on YouTube, but again, it's in English. So in his, request, really, it's around us finding ways. When I say us, the healthcare profession, finding ways to educate people in their own languages. We have a situation, for example, in the Eastern Cape, where families are opening the plastics that wrap those people who have died out of, being infected by COVID. And that's extremely, extremely dangerous. There is a reason why those bodies are actually wrapped in plastic, not just one plastic, double wrapping, so that the body fluids coming out of those, decomposing bodies do not spill out, or what we call aerosols, more like a vapor that has got high concentration of the virus, especially if the person died during the time when they were still infectious. Those are a danger. What we are seeing, though, is that our people are opening these plastics, saying, how do we know that we're not burying the right person? The wrong person. Number two, in our family, we have to view the body. And when you do that, anyone in that area is at risk of what you call, that aerosol spread from the decomposing body. But our people, because there's not enough education about the dangers of doing that, they are actually, others are coming and saying, we dreamt that so-and-so who passed a week ago is complaining that they are feeling cold from being wrapped by plastic. Or others are saying, our person appeared in the dream to say, we are cheese, is feeling hot. The plastic is making him or her, to have. Now, I don't understand that, but as a Black African, I also do know that there are certain belief systems. But we now need to look at how those belief systems, are dealt with, such that people do not expose themselves in danger. So I'm just expanding on the need for public health education, not by just people like me, who are doing it in their small corners, as a massive, massive thing. The same thing that we normally do when there are going to be elections. Obviously they can't be door-to-door campaigns now, but we need the same type of energy, across, to get people to understand misinformation and all of that. So yeah, is there any other question, Sis?
No, Doc, there are no other questions.
All right, in the absence of further questions, let me thank you, Zoreyo, Mr. Langa Nyati, for taking time to actually try and demystify and correct us and empower us, so that when we receive these things in our social media platforms, we are able to at least interrogate the information in a way that we will be able to see fake, type of information. Just to close this thing, a professor of pediatrics at the University of Bristol in the UK, Professor Adam Finn, said, in response to this thing about conspiracy theories around COVID-19 and 5G. He said, radio waves, are on the low frequency, of the electromagnetic, spectrum. It's impossible for 5G to transmit the virus. Okay, the radio waves of 5G are not strong enough to cause damage to human cells. They are, in terms of the energy, they are less than medical X-rays. And so, just another expert trying to say the association of COVID-19, a gem that is a living thing, with 5G, which is not a living thing, has got no scientific basis. So thank you, Mr. Langa Nyati. Thank you, Nwabisa, for being there to take these questions. But most of all, thank you to all the viewers who have joined us on the various platforms. I know it was supposed to be 90 minutes strictly, but we went slightly more than the 90 minutes. For that, we apologize. I want to thank you, and may you all stay safe, mask up, social distance, avoid those gatherings. Even if there's a funeral, funerals are super spreader events. So really, find other ways to support those who are bereaved, beyond thinking that the only way to support is to be physically there. May you all stay healthy. May you all stay safe. We are in the middle of a big problem. And hopefully by the end of this year, when the projected 67% of South Africans will have been vaccinated, we will be in a much better space. And from me, I would like to encourage people to take the vaccine. I'm going to take it. In fact, all of us have used vaccines from the day we were born, especially those people who are under the ages of 45. All right? We have, if you look on your, I'm not sure whether it's the left or right now, but there are some scars there from the BCG, that we took when we were born. South Africa is one of the countries that has got what we call expanded, program on immunization, starting with BCG for TB, and also oral polio vaccine, at day 0, and then 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 9 months, up to an age, over the age of 5. And those vaccines have made us not to contract the infectious diseases that have been killers. The BCG in the South African context was started, the rollout, proper rollout in 1973, after a start and stop since 1921. And as a result, more than 80% of South Africans have been vaccinated against, TB. Diseases like typhoid, diphtheria, mumps, we've taken vaccines, and we have not turned into some digital zombies. So really, I think we need to interrogate information. On that, I want to say thank you to everybody, and we will see what we can bring in the next weekend around topical issues. On Wednesday, we will be talking to a doctor who's in the front line, to share with us, how difficult it has been. And this doctor has just recovered from COVID-19 infection. And I want to see or hear from her thoughts about the vaccination program that prioritizes healthcare workers. So on that note, we'll meet on Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Yeah.